Hello everyone, welcome travelers. I am Zach Adams, welcome back to my channel, and this is a review of Chuck Palahnuik's Snuff. First and foremost, if you're new here and you like the content, go ahead and like and subscribe. I do reviews once a week, sometimes more than once a week. Really depends on how much reading I get done, but I read a lot. I also do guides for writers, and I do an update on my own writing work here on the channel. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and subscribe. What is Snuff? It is exactly what you think if you have read Chuck Palahnuik in the past, especially for those of you that are Fight Club fans. This is Chuck Palahnuik's 9th book. It's published 12 years after he originally published Fight Club, which was his first published book. And while I think that Chuck Palahnuik has definitely matured as a writer by this point, it is still very much the Chuck Palahnuik flavor. Without spoiling anything in this book, it follows a number of men really only known by their number, Mr. 600, because they are waiting in the room of a gangbangs production stage for an aging porn star who is trying to break the record for sex acts in a day. If that's not Chuck Palahnuik in a nutshell, I don't know what is. Things to know about Chuck Palahnuik novels. If you've never read anything by Chuck Palahnuik before, he is extremely into subverting expectations, pushing boundaries, and Snuff is no exception to those things. One of the twists at the end of the book is maybe a little more obvious than you might find in other Chuck Palahnuik books, but it's not the only twist in this book, and there are some you don't see coming. And the subversion of expectations is all there. People aren't who they seem to be. People are much more complicated than they seem to be. All of the magic that makes Chuck Palahnuik such an iconic author is here in Snuff, again in a different form. On that note, Chuck Palahnuik's characters are always known for being unique and demonstrating ways of thinking that are uncommon or that push boundaries in a certain way. And this is absolutely no different in that regard. In some ways, it even, without adding an almost supernatural element, what sometimes comes up in Chuck Palahnuik, this one does the same level of work in that regard without leaning on that supernatural fantasy or sci-fi element is in some of Chuck Palahnuik's other works. Without further ado, we are going to go through and use E.M. Forster's aspects of the novel to talk about Snuff specifically. The first of which is story, and this is something I was hooked on. I picked it up. It is a little less than 200 pages long, and it took me less than 2 hours total to read, so not the fastest read I've ever had, but definitely up there. The length of it helps with that. You feel like you can finish it in an afternoon. But the story is great. It doesn't have a wealth of action in the book, so there are some things that are a little missing to go and hook onto as you move from thing to thing. But the characters themselves are what drive the story, and them even slowly standing around the room and inciting and talking to and slowly figuring each other out was enough to push through. We need to figure out how to do a rating system on this channel, since this is the first thing. I think as travelers, we walk miles, and I sort of want to rate things out of 500 miles because, as we know, I would walk 500 miles. With this, I would probably walk 300 miles. I don't think I would walk 500 miles. I'm definitely not walking 500 more. The next element is character, and in terms of these characters, how like people are they? This is great. Chuck Palahnuik does this really well. His characters are always believable, they're always realistic, and they always sort of represent, even though they're unique, they are familiar enough to be plausible. Even in this, some of them are outlandish. They're on these crazy sort of like almost even epic quests in this. As you find out more about them, it makes you want to know more. So this is character's a strong element of this. I'd probably walk 400 miles for character in here. Plot is easily the weakest part of this book, but I'm actually not going to like ding it all the way down because I think that's intentional. it's just not the part of this that the story needed the most of. This story was told in such a way that the normal structures of a plot with the normal sort of like rise and fall of action isn't necessary. The characters standing in a room and figuring each other out is the plot. While it doesn't have that traditional structure, it's not really developing in a traditional sense either. The insight of the characters goes to drive the story. So I'm going to walk 200 miles for plot. Yeah, 200 out of 500 miles. Fantasy is something that E.M. Forster describes almost as how convincing is the world of this, how into the environment of the story do you fall into. And so while he uses the word fantasy, setting could be just as sort of applicable in certain books. In terms of this, you really do sort of fall into this world. Even though it's a single room, the parody movies that are playing about different aspects of our culture on the TV and the sort of thing, you do get wrapped up as if this is a very real place. Because it could be a very real place, even though these characters are all sort of made up and extreme in one way or another. 300 out of 500 miles. It's very average. Prophecy, E.M. Forster describes as the ability for characters to sort of transcend. If we were going to be doing a Joseph Campbell sort of thing or a Carl Jung sort of thing, this is like, are the characters representative of another archetype, or do they embody an element of some kind of myth? Or these characters definitely do. You have a father, a child, a mother, a reject, a lost boy, a fading star. There are so many things, and that many of those things that I just listed are all wrapped up in a single character, and you feel that story and even some of those tensions of falling star versus father versus, like revenge, vengeful, venging angel, sort of like it's all there. This is where Chuck Palahnuik eats. His characters are so representative of some element that he wants you to see in theme, and this is it. Absolutely, I'm walking 500 miles for this. I will almost walk 500 more. If it had landed a little better at the end, I would walk 500 more. But 500 miles, 500 out of 500, I'm getting there. Pattern is described as basically like form of the book. This is not a bad form. It doesn't ever jar you out of it. It's just not a very complicated form. Form is not what Chuck Palahnuik is trying to work with here. It is a slow build, and it builds straight up all the way to the end, to the climax. And yes, I chose the word climax intentionally there. It matches the theme, okay? Rhythm could be discussed as style, and while I do like the style of Chuck Palahniuk's writing, he leans a lot on the sort of like 1-2 punch of vulgarity. And if that's your thing, then this is great. It's wonderful. If it's not your thing, this book's going to off-put you. But I wouldn't say that this is some, elevated level of either beautiful simplicity or flowery. No, it's just well written. It's very median. We're going to give Rhythm 300 out of 500 miles. So, using a bell curve, as all good travelers do, because it is the most accurate, there are very few masterpieces in the world, and most things that make the national bestseller list are not absolute trash. Most things are in the middle being 250 miles out of 500. We are going to walk 328 miles for Snuff here, which out of 500, we're getting most of the way there. So, I would recommend, mostly because I recommend most of Chuck Palahniuk's stuff, and this was a good Chuck Palahnuik. It was not his best, but it was very good. I did enjoy it. It was a quick read, and I hope you enjoy it too. I feel like I always do have to give a warning at the end of Chuck Palahnuik. If you don't like grotesque, if you don't like graphic, if you don't like sexual or vulgarity, just avoid Chuck Palahnuik. You won't like his work. Well, this has been my first review. I thank you so much for coming. I hope you enjoyed. Again, if you're interested in reviews or writing tips or updates on my own writing projects, hit the subscribe button. You can find me. I will be posting 3 times a week, and I can't wait to see you guys next time. Thanks for stopping by, traveler.